boys? What's good? It's Herm. We're here today with the first big board for me of this NBA draft season. I've done a few mock drafts, but I just figured I'd get my opinion out there, let you guys know what I think of the prospects, how I think they stack up, in what order I think, the guys should be ranked in. And we're going to talk about a lot of the prospects in detail. Today we're doing the top 30, and this is Big Board 1.0, my first one of the season. So last year I think I'd done a few more by now, but we're getting into it. We're getting into the rankings, and let's just do that. But before we do, think about subscribing. We're on the road to 8,000 subscribers, only like a couple hundred away now. So think about subbing, and let's get there before the draft. So here we go. At number 1, I think it's pretty clear who's going to be there. Victor Wembanyama, center/power forward out of Metz 92 in France. These are kind of descriptions from the Ringer that I've pulled because I think they're good in kind of giving a brief glimpse into each player. So the NBA's greatest prospect in decades with the ceiling to be an all-time great, and unlike anyone the game has seen before. This dude is 7'5" and plays like a guard, which is unbelievable. 230 pounds, has put on some weight since we saw him early. A lot of people like to talk about that Kenneth Lofton game where he got kind of bodied, but that was over 2 years ago. He's put on almost 30 pounds and grown at least 2 more inches. So I think that any worries about that should be thrown out the window. 19 years old, 8-foot wingspan, which is just completely unbelievable. That's enormous. 22 points per game, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks. Was the MVP, Rookie of the Year, scoring champ, all that stuff in the French league over there. Was just a phenomenal player for them this year, and he will go to the Spurs at number 1. When you're thinking of Victor, think of like this era's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and kind of like a taller Anthony Davis is a guy who can roam, block shots, but also be like this elite offensive kind of guard skilled like threat. And instead of being like 7'1", he's 7'5". So a big difference there, and Victor's going to be a great player, and he is the best player in this year's draft class. Now let's get to number 2, where I have Scoot Henderson. Some people think Brandon Miller. I'm actually going to surprise even more here. But Scoot to me is number 2. Supreme athlete who wants to bury his opponents with ferocious dunks. Plus he has the skills to both lead an offense and energize a defense. 6'2", 195, only 19 years old, 6'9" wingspan, 16.5 points per game, 6.5 assists, 1 steal. Did kind of have a better first year in the Ignite program than he did his second year, but I think a lot of that had to do with after he played so well against Victor, he kind of honed it down, he phoned it in a little bit and started taking it a little easier because he knew he'd probably be the second pick. Very Russell Westbrook-esque Derrick Rose. Has a pretty good mid-range shot right now, some room to grow as a defender, but a pretty decent one at this point, and has the ability to be a very good defender because of the wingspan, because of the athleticism. I made a video like a week ago saying that the Hornets better not mess this up. They better take Scoot at 2. He's just a great player. He's a future all-star. Scoot Henderson is a very high-level talent, and in most years he would be the number 1 pick. This dude is a stud, and to me he's the second best player in this draft class. And at number 3 we have my first riser, and that would be me placing point guard Amen Thompson out of the Overtime Elite in the number 3 spot over Brandon Miller because of his pro day stuff, because of his workouts with the Portland Trailblazers, and the athleticism was on display. I'm sure you guys have seen a couple of the pictures of the vertical. The vertical is ridiculous. He's a crazy athlete. Overtime Elite competition, not great, but this dude is just a great player whether the competition was there or not. Also, they did play over internationally. Overtime Elite had a tour, and he still averaged 18 points a game against kind of the other top leagues in the world, and did a good job with that. So electric shot creator with a distinguished combination of passing vision and zippy athleticism. 6'7", 200 pounds, 20 years old, 6'9" wingspan, and kind of compared to guys like a taller version of Ja Morant or a skinnier version of Zion Williamson. This dude is a top tier athlete, 99th percentile athlete, great at getting to the rim. The shot can kind of improve, but to me at this point, because of some of the concerns with Brandon Miller, as well as just how gifted physically Amen Thompson is, I have him as the 3rd best player in this year's draft class. Higher than a lot of people would, but to me, I think that's the place you slot him in, and that's just my opinion, is that I think he's better than Brandon Miller. I think he's a better prospect. I think he has slightly higher upside. I think the floor on Brandon Miller might actually be a little higher, but to me, Amen Thompson is just an athlete you don't see very often, so I'm going to rank him at number 3. At number 4, I have Brandon Miller out of Alabama, a guy that's kind of slipping a little bit. Tall scorer with playmaking skills who can do everything on the court. Something came out, I believe it was either today or yesterday, saying that his lawyer sent him a statement to him and with teams that he would not be commenting on the legal issues that happened with that shooting with his Alabama teammate Darius Miles earlier in the season. He would not be commenting on his involvement, which I think is sketchy. I think the point there is that he doesn't want to indict himself or say anything that could make himself look poorly in terms of the law. I think Brandon Miller likely isn't, like some great criminal or something, but the off-the-court issues I think you do have to take into account. 6'9", 200 pounds, 20 years old, 6'11" wingspan. Also something to take into account is the wingspan isn't super big for his height. It's not a great testing measure there. 19 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, 38% from 3. Does have all-star upside legitimately, but the 3 for 19 in his last game at Alabama was a little concerning to me in the tournament, as well as the off-court issues, so I pushed him down one spot. I think it'd be wrong to push him down any further, but I think 4 right now is the right slot for me for Brandon Miller. Kind of a Paul George type, though, who's really good offensively and great defensively. I don't know if Brandon Miller will ever hit that kind of defensive ability, but offensively the game is very similar to someone like Paul George. At number 5, I have Cam Whitmore, who's higher than some other people have him. I know The Ringer doesn't have Cam Whitmore this high. CBS Sports doesn't have Cam Whitmore this high. I just really like him. He is kind of built like one of those guys that's just an NBA All-Star. Relentless competitor who has a high floor and has flashed signs of stardom. Is going to be a solid contributor on the wing right away as a rookie because he kind of complements a lot of players well. But on top of that, has the ability to be a star on the wing. 6'6", 235 pounds, only 18 years old, one of the younger prospects in this year's draft class. 6'8" wingspan, like I said with Miller, that's not a big wingspan difference, but I'm not as concerned with him because it's not like he's shooting over the top of people. A lot of Cam Whitmore's game is physical. It's getting to the rim at 235 pounds. It's being a bruiser through people and finishing through contact, but he's also a really good athlete. Not an Amen Thompson level of athlete, but maybe like a 90th percentile athlete rather than a 99th percentile athlete. But very similar to players like Miles Bridges, Josh Smith, who are super athletic wings who worked on their shots, pretty good in isolation, 20 point per game scores, and I think Cam Whitmore has that kind of upside. I think Detroit should take him at 5. It's my opinion, but to me, Cam Whitmore is the 5th best player in this year's draft class because of the star upside, because of the physical traits, and a lot of the offensive flashes that we've seen. Also a pretty underrated passer as well. At number 6, I have combo guard Anthony Black out of Arkansas. Enhances star teammates by instantly processing plays while thriving in any role. Anthony Black reminds me a lot of kind of other bigger, kind of confusing players coming into the draft who just are big but can really pass well. Kind of like Josh Giddey, like Franz Wagner, Lonzo Ball on the high end in terms of prospects. But 6'6", 210 pounds, 19 years old, 13 points per game, at Arkansas, 4 assists and 2 steals. Pretty good defender for his height, good floor vision. Is going to be a great kind of initiator of an offense, as well as a guy who keeps the ball moving and is kind of a stopper on the defensive end. I think he's a guy that should continue to rise. A lot of people earlier on in the process had him, kind of in the early teens, late lottery type area. But to me, I think he should be as high as 6. I think there's an argument to be had. You could put him at 5 too, because right now he's a better defender than Cam Whitmore, and he's a better passer than Cam Whitmore. I don't know if the offensive upside is quite as high, but to me, Anthony Black is just a super polished player in a lot of areas, and that makes him the 6th best player in this year's draft class. At number 7, I have Ausar Thompson, who has upside probably a little higher than a guy like Anthony Black or even Cam Whitmore because of the athleticism. Blur of an athlete who makes a significant two-way impact with lockdown defense and aggressive downhill scoring. Is a good defender defender, just like Anthony Black is. A very good athlete, but the shooting is really inconsistent at this point. 6'6", 220 pounds, 20 years old. Again, a little older than some of the other guys in this draft class, but has a good wingspan, has really good athleticism, but the shot selection and the efficiency at this point is kind of a problem a little bit, to be like a reliant knockdown shooter on the wing, because he's probably going to play like the small forward or shooting guard spot, and it's just a spot in today's NBA you want to be able to shoot a little bit. But to me, guys like Jason Richardson, Sean Livingston are kind of proper comparisons as big wingspan wings who are pretty good passers on top of good defenders, and has slight all-star upside. I think his upside is a little lower than his brother Amen, but Ausar is still a very good player, and I think this is just a testament to this year's draft class, is there's a lot of good players at the top, and Ausar Thompson is a guy with a pretty high ceiling as well. At number 8, I have Taylor Hendricks, small forward / power forward. I've been kind of lower on him throughout the mock drafts. I've had him around 10 to 12 range, but after watching some more film, after looking into Hendricks a little bit more, I'm going to slide him up to 8 because of the defensive ability, because of some of the offensive stuff. The handle is a bit of a concern, but game-changing point of attack defender who also fills gaps on offense, is a playmaker and a shooter. So can space the floor, can pass the ball. The dribbling aspect is something that needs to improve, which is kind of on a lot of people's minds right now after what we're seeing with Jaylen Brown. But Taylor Hendricks has a pretty high floor and maybe a somewhat lower ceiling. 6'8", 215 pounds, 19 years old, pretty big wingspan at 7'1", 15 points per game, 7 rebounds, and almost 2 blocks this year at UCF. For a wing, super solid in terms of block rate. Jeremy Grant, Jade McDaniels, I think is the type of player you're looking at here, is a lockdown perimeter guy who has the ability to grow offensively and become better on that end of the floor. So Taylor Hendricks right now, you're looking at a good defender who can pass a little bit, who can shoot a little bit, but needs to work on self-creation, needs to work on ball handling. But Taylor Hendricks has a high floor because of some kind of bona fide traits that he offers you right now. At number 9, I have Jarace Walker, power forward out of Houston. I've ranked him over Taylor Hendricks a couple times, but I'm going to rank Jarace Walker as the guy right behind him right now. A versatile wrecking ball on defense and skilled playmaker on offense, which you don't see out of power forwards a lot. Even bigger wingspan than Hendricks, actually. 6'7", 250 pounds, physical bruiser type of player, pretty good athlete. 19 years old, 7'3" wingspan, 11 points per game, 7 assists, and 35% from 3 for a player of his size is pretty solid and going to improve. Kind of reminds you of Hornets Larry Johnson, Carl Landry, as guys who are good athletes but are physically imposing in terms of getting to the rim, finishing through contact. Jarace Walker is going to be a very high-level role player. Will he ever be a star? I don't know, but he's going to be a good starter at the power forward spot for a pretty long time in this league, and he slides into the 9 spot in my rankings. At number 10, I have shooting guard Keyonte George out of Baylor, who's rising. Some people had kind of dropped him outside of the lottery just a little bit, but was really impressive at his pro day. Didn't technically participate in the combine, but was having his pro day during the combine period. Lively scorer with the ability to shred defenses, though his playmaking and defensive intensity give him the upside to be a complete guard. 6'4", 185 pounds, 19 years old. We don't really know his wingspan. He didn't get tested at the combine for it. 15 points per game, 3 assists, 1 steal. Is kind of one of those microwave scorer type guys like Bradley Beal, like Jaden Hardy, and I think the play of Jaden Hardy, the upside we've seen from him, is going to help rise a player like Keyonte George, kind of like Cam Thomas as well, who went way too late as a microwave scoring type. But Keyonte George offers a lot more defensive upside than a guy like Cam Thomas, and more than a guy like Jaden Hardy as well, and a pretty good passer for a 2-guard. Keyonte George deserves to be a top 10 player in this year's class. I don't know if he's going to be picked inside the top 10 because he's probably not going to be a point guard, and at 6'4" on the wing, you're kind of undersized. undersized, but is just a great scorer and is going to do that in the league. So to me, he has to be a top 10 prospect. At number 11, I have point guard Cason Wallace out of Kentucky, game-changing point of attack defender who also fills gaps on offense as a playmaker and a shooter. A lot of that shooting is more in the mid-range than it is on the three-point line, but the defense along with some offensive ability is intriguing. 6'2", 195 pounds, just 19 years old, 6'8" wingspan, 12 points per game, 4 assists, 2 steals at Kentucky. Just kind of a guy who reads passing lanes really well as getting steals from ball handlers. Drew Holiday type of player. D'Anthony Melton is probably a more realistic comparison, but he was huge for Philly all of this season, and Cason Wallace, if not a starting point guard right away, will end up being a starting point guard, I'd say sooner rather than later. Is just a steady presence at the one spot. At number 12, I'd have Gradey Dick out of Kansas, shooting guard, small forward, sharpshooting wing with the playmaking skill that'll make him more than just a specialist. So he's not quite someone like Duncan Robinson, who's kind of just a floor spacer, who's been very good in the Miami playoff run, by the way. But Gradey Dick, I think, as a playmaker, offers you some different things. 6'6", 205 pounds, just 19 years old, 6'9" wingspan isn't huge or anything, and defensively is definitely the concern with Gradey. 14 points per game, 40% from three, really impressive three-point shooter, 5 rebounds per game. Compared to guys like Reggie Miller, Bojan Bogdanovic, I think are kind of reasonable comparisons for him. Reggie Miller's extremely on the high end, but he can get more easily to a player like Bojan, who's kind of a 18 point per game scorer on a normal team realistically, who can space the floor, can hit shots off of screens, but doesn't provide you a ton outside of offense and shooting. And Gradey Dick is kind of a specialist, but has the ability to be slightly more than that. At number 13, I have combo guard Kobe Bufkin out of Michigan. He's been a riser throughout the pre-draft process, kind of started as a late first round guy. It just has continued to fly up into the lottery. Dynamic two-way presence who will fill up highlight reels. If his jumper keeps trending up, he has all-star potential. I think the all-star side here with Kobe Bufkin is kind of a reach. He can get there for sure, but I wouldn't bet on Kobe Bufkin being an all-star, but the upside is there. 6'4", 185 pounds, 6'8" wingspan, 14 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, and 36% from three, which is a lot better than a lot of people expected, and got better as the season went along. Is a pretty decent scorer, a good rebounder for a guy of his height, but similar to guys like Tyrese Maxey, Emmanuel Quickley, fast players who can get downhill and are kind of pests defensively is what Kobe Bufkin is going to be. I have him going to the Raptors in my last mock draft. It just feels like a perfect team fit for what they like to do, but Kobe Bufkin is a kind of a nice six-man or a kind of solid stopgap starter probably is what you're looking at, especially early on, but again has the potential to keep trending up if his shooting continues to get better. At number 14, I have Leonard Miller out of the G League Ignite, combo forward, big man with guard skills, but he's still growing into his body, so it's pretty raw as a prospect, but as the G League Ignite season went on, he just looked better and better, and a lot of points throughout the Ignite season, you could argue that he was their best player, not Scoot Henderson, so interest in him throughout the Ignite season as well as in the pre-draft process just continues to go up and up. 6'9", 215 pounds, 7'2" wingspan, 18 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, and about 1 block. Pro comparison is Paul Millsap, but you could look at other guys as well. Is kind of athletic guard type bigs, but there's just not a lot of them out there. He kind of provides a unique skill set, and I'm interested to see how that continues to trend. And because of the upside, I think you could see him go a lot earlier than people expect. Some people have him ranked kind of later in the teens. I have him a little higher just because I think he could go pretty high. Is a guy that wouldn't shock me if he ends up going in the lottery just because of what the potential is rather than what he is right now. At number 15, I have point guard Jalen Hood-Schifino, a lot higher than the Ringer has him. I think they have him like in the 20s, like the early 20s, but is a guy who I've liked since pretty late in Indiana's season. As it went on, it's just proved to be a great player as a freshman. Big cerebral guard who thrives as a playmaker from the mid-range. 6'4", 215 pounds, is 20 years old, kind of older for a freshman, but a 6'10" wingspan for a guy his height is really impressive. Kind of glimpses of Marcus Smart, not quite the defender, but the overall package I think is kind of similar, as well as someone like Spencer Dinwiddie on the offensive side of the ball, and just someone who I think has the upside to be a a very good quality starter and is kind of a high floor player as well. I liked what he did as a freshman alongside Trace Jackson-Davis, and Hood-Schifino to me is a guy who should be ranked somewhere around here. At number 16, I have shooting guard Nick Smith Jr. out of Arkansas. Just continues to fall down after a disappointing freshman season for the Razorbacks. Slippery scorer who can get into any shot he wants to, but needs to improve his consistency. 6'5", 185 pounds with a 6'8" wingspan, compared to guys like Jamal Murray and Tyler Hero, and you look at them and you're like, oh, like he should be going higher than this. But I think this is realistic just because of the injury concerns throughout his freshman season at Arkansas, as well as kind of the slightly disappointing play when he was on the floor. Is a little undersized, not a great defender. The offensive upside is definitely there as a scoring type, but to me it's more upside than it is reality right now. So I think 16 is fair. Number 17, I have Derek Lively out of Duke. A little higher than some people have him, but I just really like what he provides. Highly touted recruit who hasn't met expectations, but has defensive versatility and offensive upside. 7'1", 230 pounds, 19 years old, with a 7'7" wingspan. Damn. 5.2 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 2.4 blocks. The points aren't going to wow you, neither are the rebounds, but the block percentage for the minutes he was playing is ridiculous. Tyson Chandler type of player, a stronger Nick Claxton. He's big, he's physical. It just feels, even though he's maybe more of a traditional big man, is a guy who can be a very, very solid center for a team and has the upside to be much more than that. Was the number 1 ranked player in his high school class. Had a disappointing season at Duke for sure, but the block and the defensive aspect was still very much on display, and I think on the NBA level it might fit him better than we saw in college. At number 18, I have Amari Bailey out of UCLA. I did a combine kind of risers video, winners and losers from the NBA combine, and Amari Bailey was my biggest winner because he looked great at the combine. 6'5", 185 pounds, 19 years old, with a 6'7" wingspan. The wingspan isn't great, but he looked great as a primary scorer as well as an initiator of the offense. 11 points per game at UCLA, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Just got better as the year went along. Jalen Clark got injured, and after that, Amari Bailey was just phenomenal. The Ringer doesn't even have him in the top 40, which I think is so disrespectful. We'll see what happens in their next update, but Amari Bailey to me is a guy who has to be a first-round pick. 18 might be a little high. Some people might argue that, but to me, Amari Bailey was a super high player out of high school, was highly ranked, and just is a guy that feels like an NBA star in the waiting, and I think we could be looking back and being like, how did this guy not go early lottery? Because Amari Bailey is so skilled as an offensive player, as a passer, is super athletic, and I was just really impressed throughout his combine as well as throughout the end of UCLA's season. Is a kind of higher offensive upside Alex Caruso, as well as an Avery Bradley type. He just projects as a good defender because of the speed, athleticism, and the motor. A lot of players don't work as hard as Amari Bailey does. He's always trying hard, and I respect it, and I think he has star upside, so I'm going to put him at 18. It's a little bold, but he's one of my biggest risers, and I just really like his game. At number 19, I have small forward Bilal Coulibaly out of Mets 92, Victor Wembanyama's teammate. If you've watched Victor Wembanyama, obviously he's been the guy that has stood out, but another guy who stood out as people have watched more and more film of this team is Coulibaly. Fast rising prospect who is luring in teams with his defense and intriguing offensive flashes. 6'8", 190 pounds with a 7'3" wingspan, and is only 18 years old. Very young. We could see him not enter the draft, end up kind of coming out next year, but is a guy that could get drafted in the first round this year pretty easily. 11 points per game, 4.4 rebounds, 1.4 steals, is a defensive stopper for Mets 92 and has been a starter at 18 years old. Is kind of an OG Anunoby type player who's a great defender with flashes of offensive, like really good offensive upside. On the low end, I think you're looking at someone like Torrey Craig, who's a very good role player as a defender and sometimes a pretty decent spacer. So Coulibaly continues to rise because of the defense as well as the rising offense. At number 20, I have shooting guard Jordan Hawkins out of Uconn. He just provides an elite skill. Flawless shooter who bangs threes all over the court and brings tons of other winning qualities. Is a guy who shoots really well off of movement, which you don't see super often. Very Duncan Robinson-esque in terms of the not needing to be set necessarily Klay Thompson-esque as well. 6'4", 185 pounds, 21 years old, is a little older, but helped lead UConn to the title, as well as Adama Sanogo, who I actually think is a big winner from the combine as well. But 16 points per game, 1.3 assists, and 39% from three for UConn. I'm impressed with him. He's a great shooter and is going to continue to be a great shooter. Think Buddy Hield from Oklahoma when he was there. Max Strus, Rip Hamilton type of player. I think he can be a pretty good defender as well, but right now it's just going to be a great floor spacer and a specialist as a shooter. At 21, I have Brandin Podziemski out of Santa Clara, shooting guard. Big riser from the combine as well. 6'5", 205 pounds, 20 years old. We don't really know his wingspan, but 20 points per game, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. Sorry, that should say assists. But really, really good rebounder for his height at 6'5". Very Josh Hart-esque in terms of the rebounding. Is a pretty solid defender. He's going to continue to improve, but the offensive flashes is something that I'm really excited about, and a player who can be more than just a shooter, but who can kind of create for himself. Jalen Williams was the big riser from Santa Clara last year. They actually never played together, even though Podziemski is a sophomore. Played at Illinois his freshman year, didn't do a ton there, transferred to Santa Clara, and all of a sudden emerged as a dominant number one option. And I think he's a guy who we could continue to see rise even more throughout the process. Podziemski might legitimately be a lottery pick by the time the draft is over, and is one of the biggest players to keep an eye on at this point. Not top 40 with the ringer either, I don't believe, but to me he just has to be this high because of all the different things that he does, but especially the rebounding for a guard. I just love to see that because it's an effort thing. It's something that is very positively reflected in a player. At number 22, I have small forward / shooting guard Brice Sensabaugh out of Ohio State. Pure bucket getter who wasn't projected to be a one and done, but has shined as a freshman scorer. Initially was rising pretty good and was almost like a lottery level guy, but I think at this point, just because of some of the other risers, we're seeing Brice Sensabaugh fall a little bit. 6'6", 235, 19 years old, 16 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, and 41% from three. It's just a build that we don't see in the NBA super often. TJ Warren type of guy who's just a scorer, is a very solid scorer, and he's going to continue to be that. But the guy that Brice Sensabaugh is something that we don't see succeed in the NBA super often, but he could end up being a very good player, and I think he's a first-round talent for sure. The offense is going to be there, but how does he adjust to not being the guy in an offense? Can he adjust to a role change that we're going to see in the NBA? And because of that, some concerns with that, he's a little lower than maybe he was at one point. At number 23, I have Kris Murray, Keegan Murray's brother out of Iowa. Intelligent player who understands his 3-and-D role and thrives in it. 6'8", 215 pounds, 22 years old with a 7-foot wingspan, 20 points per game in his junior year at Iowa, 8 rebounds and 1.2 blocks. Kind of similar to Keegan in the way that they play. Kris Murray's left-handed and Keegan is right-handed, I believe is the way that it is. But Kris Murray is not quite the level of shooter that Keegan is kind of more of a traditional post-up forward rather than a complete floor spacer the way Keegan is. So their games aren't identical, but is going to be a guy who's just a winning type of player and is a player who I think has a high floor and is going to be an impact guy pretty early on. At 24, another combine riser who did great in the first scrimmage and then did well enough that he kind of just opted out of the second scrimmage because of how well he did in the first one, and that would be power forward / small forward Olivier Maxence-Prosper, as I'm going to call him, OMP, out of Marquette. 6'7", 210 pounds, 20 years old with a 7-foot wingspan, 12.5 points per game, 4.7 rebounds, and 51% from the field, as well as showing good 3-point upside at the combine. Is kind of a John Collins type of player who's a little undersized as a forward, but just a really good athlete, finishing above the rim, and provides you some floor spacing, which John Collins has kind of been up and down at. But OMP is a big riser for me throughout this process. I've been really impressed, especially with what he did at the combine, and to me that slides him all the way up to a top 25 player at number 24. And at 25, I have Rayan Rupert out of France, who's sliding a little bit. At one point was considered as a guy in the teens. Lockdown defender who shows flashes on offense and could eventually become a complete player, but because the offense is just flashes, the offensive isn't locked in, and the shooting is a bit of a concern. To me, that's slipping for me. I think that slips him down a little bit. 6'6", 195. The 7'3" wingspan is obviously the biggest point of intrigue here. 7 points, 2.5 rebounds basically, and 31% from 3. On the high end, I think you could see like a Suns version of Mikal Bridges or like an Otto Porter Jr. type, who are solid defenders and provide some spacing from time to time. But the shooting for Rupert needs to improve, but the defense is good enough that I think he has to be this high still at this point. At number 26, I have small forward / shooting guard Jett Howard out of Michigan. Slight faller again because of other guys sliding up ahead of him. Even his teammate Kobe Bufkin, who at one point was considered the lesser prospect, but now is kind of consensusly the higher prospect. Slick offensive threat who could shine next to a lead playmaker. I would still kind of be interested if the Lakers took him at like 17, but to me as a guy who has the ability to be kind of a really impressive offensive player. The defense isn't great. 6'8", 215 pounds, 14 points per game, 2 assists, and 37% from 3. Is going to be a good shooter, but can he improve to more than that? But is very similar offensively to a guy like Desmond Bane, and I think that's what makes him interesting. But the wingspan, I think, like Bane, isn't super big. We don't know what it is for sure, but at 6'8" is a little bigger and is a solid size for a wing to be able to shoot over defenders. So I think he has interest and intrigue because of his size and because of the shooting right now, but can he develop more as kind of a individual shot creator as well as a defender? At 27, I have small forward Andre Jackson out of UConn, who some people thought might withdraw but decided today to stay in the NBA draft, and I have him at 27. Menace of a defender who often baits opponents into mistakes, leading to easy blocks and steals. Isn't going to wow you with a lot of his stats at 7 points, 5 assists, 6 rebounds, but is just an elite defender. 6'6" with a 6'10" wingspan, 21 years old. Very similar to me to Robert Covington, who for a lot of his career hasn't been a great shooter, but is just such an important, valuable defender that he gets NBA minutes, and that's what Andre Jackson is to me. But the upside isn't super high offensively, which is why I have him at 27, but the defense is really solid. At 28, I have Jaime Jaquez out of UCLA. Nifty scorer and hustling defender who just needs an improved jumper to have a fruitful career. I think you could place him higher than 28. A lot of people are pretty high on him, and I kind of like him as well. 6'6", 225, is 22 years old because he played all 4 years at UCLA. 6'10" wingspan, 18 points per game, 8 rebounds, 1.5 steals. Kind of similar to Rick Fox's game, but just as a guy who's going to be a good player because he's not going to have any of that big role change because he played all of them at UCLA. He was kind of like this initiating passer type. He was the lead offensive guy. He just did so many different roles at UCLA, from a role player to a star player, that I think he's going to be able to adjust to the NBA game pretty quickly and just be a solid NBA player. I don't think he's a star. I don't think Jaime Jaquez is necessarily ever going to be that, but he's a guy who's a very productive player and just does a lot of different things and is a winning player. At number 29, I have power forward Noah Clowney out of Alabama, Brandon Miller's teammate, plays with an edge and possesses the type of defensive versatility valued in the NBA. 6'10", 210 pounds, one of the younger players in this year's draft at 18, 10 points per game, 8 rebounds, like a block. Kind of similar to Wendell Carter, as a defensive type who has the ability and improvement to potentially be a decent floor spacer down the line. I've seen some projections for the Jazz to draft him, which I actually really like, because if you're running a front court with Lowry, Clowney, and Walker Kessler, you have great size as well as 2 great defensive players, because Clowney's a good defender. That's his biggest kind of positive trait at this point. But Clowney is going to be a good defender. I think his wingspan should be pretty big, but is a good defensive player. The offense is a little limited, so pairing him with Kessler could be kind of concerning a little, but I like him as a defender. The offense needs to improve a little bit, but he's working to improve the shooting, and he's young, so he's definitely worth taking a flyer on in the first round. And at number 30, with the last one, I have Colby Jones out of Xavier, team player with NBA-ready qualities, as a connective piece on offense and a versatile defender. 6'5", 200 pounds, 21 years old, with a 6'8" wingspan, 15 points per game, 4.5 assists, 38% from 3. Kind of a Malcolm Brogdon type, is just a nice role player who can be a solid 6-man for you. Brogdon just won 6th Man of the Year. I don't think Colby Jones is going to be a 6th Man of the Year type, but is going to be a really solid backup guard, and is just a, kind of one of those older players that ends up being a pretty decent contributor early on. So to me, Colby Jones is going to be the last of this top 30 prospects list, the last player on the list. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of the breakdowns. I tried not to spend too much time on each prospect. Hopefully it was fine. But that's going to be it for me today. If you enjoyed, think about subscribing. Again, on the road to 8,000. Think about liking the video and leaving a comment with your thoughts. But that's going to be it for me today. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.